It was just another ordinary morning at Lincoln High School, but something was about to happen that no one could have predicted. The school was buzzing with its usual energy. Students rushing to class, teachers prepping their lessons, and the faint rhythmic sound of a mop sliding across the hallway floors. Among them was Mr. Lewis, the quiet janitor everyone saw but rarely noticed. He was a calm man in his 50s, with gentle eyes and a kind smile. He did his job without complaint, cleaning classrooms and sweeping floors. Most people never spoke to him, except to ask for help. But on this morning, fate decided to put him right in the middle of something unforgettable. Inside the math classroom, Mr. Clark, one of the most arrogant teachers in the school, was holding court. He was known for his pride, his sharp tongue, and his love of showing off. He enjoyed making others feel small, especially if they didn't have a degree or fancy title. He believed his knowledge made him superior, and he wore that belief like a crown. As the bell rang, students began leaving, laughing and chatting. Mr. Clark stayed behind, erasing the board and muttering about lazy kids and simple minds. Just then he heard a sound from the hallway, the slow, rhythmic squeak of a mop. Mr. Lewis was cleaning outside the door, humming softly to himself. Mr. Clark frowned. He didn't like distractions. He walked to the doorway and said sharply, "Lewis, can you keep that noise down? Some of us are doing real work here." The janitor looked up, his smile never fading. "Sorry, sir," he said softly. "Didn't mean to bother you." That should have been the end of it. But Mr. Clark's pride wouldn't let him stop. He glanced at the chalkboard where a complex equation he'd planned for his advanced students was written. It was filled with symbols, square roots, and formulas most people wouldn't understand. A smirk crept across his face. He called out, "Tell me, Lewis, do you know what this is?" He pointed at the board. "This is mathematics, the kind that separates thinkers from cleaners." A few students still in the hallway paused, peeking through the doorway. They knew that cruel, sarcastic tone. Mr. Lewis looked at the board quietly. "Looks complicated," he said with a small nod. "But beautiful, in a way." Mr. Clark laughed. "Beautiful? You can't even read it. Tell you what, why don't you try solving it? If you can find the right answer, I'll clean the floor for you today." The students giggled, thinking it was just a cruel game. But Mr. Lewis didn't look insulted. He simply put down his mop and walked into the classroom. His calmness confused everyone. He studied the board for a moment, not rushing, not flustered. Mr. Clark crossed his arms, smirking. "You're wasting your time, Lewis. That's an equation my top students couldn't even attempt." The janitor didn't respond. He picked up a piece of chalk and began writing. The room fell silent. His handwriting was neat and confident. Every line, every symbol made sense to him. The sound of chalk tapping the board echoed in the quiet classroom. The students stared, their smiles fading. Even Mr. Clark's smirk disappeared, replaced by disbelief. The janitor was working through complex steps with ease. Something incredible was happening. After several minutes, he stopped, stepped back, and put the chalk down. He looked at the teacher and said gently, "I think that should be right." Mr. Clark blinked. "What did you say?" He walked closer, his eyes darting from one line to another. He recognized the logic. The steps were perfect. He rechecked the math, hoping to find an error, but there was none. The janitor had solved it. The silence in the room was heavy. Mr. Lewis picked up his mop again, nodded politely, and said, "You can check it later, sir. I've got floors to finish." He left the classroom, his footsteps quiet and steady. The students were frozen. One whispered, "Did he just solve it?" Mr. Clark didn't answer. His face turned pale. He looked at the equation, then at the doorway where the janitor had disappeared. His pride felt shattered. The man he had mocked had done something even he couldn't have done so easily. Word spread through the halls like wildfire. The janitor who cleaned the floors had solved an equation that stumped Mr. Clark himself. That night, Mr. Clark stayed late, staring at the board, tracing the flawless steps the janitor had written. He finally whispered to himself, "Who are you, Mr. Lewis?" But the janitor was already gone, unaware that he had just changed the way everyone in that school would see him forever. That simple challenge, born from arrogance, had revealed what true genius and humility really look like. The next morning, the halls of Lincoln High buzzed like a beehive. Students huddled in groups, their whispers all centered on one unbelievable story. The quiet janitor, Mr. Lewis, had solved a math problem that even the proudest teacher, Mr. Clark, couldn't handle. When Mr. Lewis arrived with his mop and cart, a hush fell over the hallways. Some students offered shy smiles, others just stared with wide-eyed curiosity. He didn't seem to notice, just gave a polite nod and went about his daily routine, calm and focused as always. Inside the staff room, it was a different story. Teachers were whispering too. Some laughed in disbelief while others tried to defend Mr. Clark, chalking it up to a lucky guess. But underneath it all, everyone was intrigued. How could a janitor solve something so complex in just a few minutes? When Mr. Clark walked in, his face was pale and stiff. The whispers and awkward laughter followed him, and he could feel every eye on him. Someone joked, "Hey, Clark, maybe you should let Lewis teach your next class." The room filled with muffled chuckles. Mr. Clark didn't respond. He just sat down, pretending to read a newspaper, but his hands trembled slightly. Later, he returned to his classroom, staring at the blackboard. The solution was still there, neat and exact. He'd spent hours last night rechecking it, and it was perfect. The realization chipped away at his pride. While Mr. Clark was lost in thought, Mr. Lewis quietly continued his work, never once mentioning what happened. At lunch, he sat under a tree, eating his sandwich and scribbling in a small notebook. A gust of wind lifted a page, revealing rows of complex formulas. A student named Emily, one of Mr. Clark's top students, happened to see it. Curiosity got the better of her. She approached him shyly. "Mr. Lewis, that math you did yesterday, how did you learn all that?" He looked up, surprised but gentle. "Oh, that?" he said with a smile. "I used to study a bit when I was younger. I liked numbers. They make sense even when life doesn't." Emily tilted her head. "You mean you went to college for math?" Mr. Lewis chuckled softly. "For a while, yes. But life had other plans. Things got complicated, and I had to leave before I finished." His words held no bitterness, just quiet acceptance. Something about his peaceful wisdom made Emily's heart ache a little. She realized this man wasn't just a janitor. He had a story worth knowing. Later in class, Mr. Clark tried to act normal, but his usual confidence was gone. He saw the same curiosity in his students' eyes, but this time it felt different. Not admiration, but doubt. When the bell rang, Emily stayed behind. "Sir," she asked carefully, "was Mr. Lewis right about that equation?" Mr. Clark's jaw tightened. He sighed, looking at the board. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "He was right." Emily smiled. "That's amazing, isn't it?" But Mr. Clark didn't smile back. "It's unexpected," he said. "Genius sometimes hides where we least expect it." That night, as the halls emptied, Mr. Lewis was mopping the last classroom. He noticed a sheet of paper on a desk. Mr. Clark's old equations. He paused, then gently corrected a small error in one of the formulas before leaving. The next morning, when Mr. Clark saw the correction, his heart skipped a beat. He hadn't even noticed that mistake himself. This wasn't luck. Mr. Lewis was brilliant. From that moment, a quiet shift began at the school. Students' respect for Mr. Lewis grew, while Mr. Clark's confidence started to crack. But for Mr. Lewis, none of it mattered. To him, numbers weren't for fame. They were for peace. And as whispers turned into awe, everyone at Lincoln High began to sense an undeniable truth. Something extraordinary was hidden beneath that humble uniform. By the end of that week, the story had spread far beyond just one classroom. The entire school was buzzing with rumors. Some said the janitor was secretly a college professor. Others claimed he had once worked for NASA. There was no proof, only whispers. But the mystery made everyone curious. Students who used to walk past Mr. Lewis without a single glance now stopped to greet him. They offered shy smiles, little waves, and respectful nods. Mr. Lewis would always smile back, humble as ever, never hinting at the storm of attention surrounding him. He just went on doing his job, dusting the lockers, cleaning chalkboards, and fixing broken chairs. But behind all the gossip and laughter, something deeper was happening. The story had planted a question in everyone's mind. How much do we really know about the people around us? The man sweeping the floor might know more than the one giving the lecture. Mr. Clark, meanwhile, was having the hardest week of his career. His pride had taken a blow that no one could see but everyone could sense. Every time he heard students whisper, "The janitor," his stomach twisted. He tried to ignore it, to act like nothing had happened. But the humiliation burned quietly inside him. One afternoon, while walking down the hallway, Mr. Clark overheard two students talking near the lockers. "I think Mr. Lewis used to be a scientist," one said. "No, I heard he was a university mathematician," said the other. They both laughed, but not mockingly. There was admiration in their voices. For the first time, Mr. Clark realized his students admired the janitor more than they admired him. That night, he sat in his empty classroom staring at the same math problem that had started it all. The solution still glowed faintly on the chalkboard. He whispered to himself, "How could he have known that?" His curiosity began to mix with something he didn't expect: respect. While he wrestled with his pride, Emily was quietly doing her own research. She couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Lewis and the way he had solved that problem so easily. She stayed late in the library looking through old newspapers, yearbooks, and university records. After 2 days, she found something that made her heart skip a beat. In an old academic journal from nearly 25 years ago, she found the name Marcus Lewis, listed as a co-author on a paper about advanced mathematical theory. The article described new methods for solving nonlinear equations, methods almost identical to what he had written on the board. It couldn't be a coincidence. The next morning, Emily ran to find him. She spotted Mr. Lewis cleaning the science wing, quietly mopping the floors. She approached him breathlessly. "Mr. Lewis, were you once a university mathematician?" she asked. He looked up, surprised, then chuckled softly. "You've been digging, haven't you?" Emily nodded eagerly. "I saw your name in an old research journal. You worked with Professor Alan Grayson. He's famous now." Mr. Lewis sighed, setting the mop aside. "That was a long time ago," he said gently. "Before life decided I needed to learn a different kind of math, the kind that doesn't use numbers." Emily frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "Sometimes life takes everything you think matters and replaces it with what really does. Family, peace, humility." His voice was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of memories. Emily didn't press further, but her respect for him grew even more. She realized that Mr. Lewis wasn't hiding from his past. He had simply chosen not to let it define him. Later that day, word of Emily's discovery spread through the halls like wildfire. Everyone started to see Mr. Lewis differently. Even the teachers grew quiet when he walked by. Mr. Clark overheard two of them whisper, "Can you believe it? The janitor used to be a mathematical researcher." That night, Mr. Clark couldn't sleep. He lay awake, replaying every word, every smirk, every insult he had thrown at Mr. Lewis. The shame cut deep. How many times had he looked down on that man? How many times had he laughed at someone who was, in truth, greater than him? The next morning, Mr. Clark walked into the building earlier than usual. He found Mr. Lewis in the hallway, polishing the trophy case. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, he spoke. "Mr. Lewis, I owe you an apology." Mr. Lewis turned, surprised. "For what, sir?" "For underestimating you," Mr. Clark said softly. "For judging you before I knew who you really were." Mr. Lewis smiled kindly. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Clark. We all learn in our own ways." Those words hit deeper than any lecture ever could. From that day forward, the entire school began to change. Students stopped snickering at janitors. Teachers greeted the maintenance staff with real respect. And somewhere deep inside, Mr. Clark began to realize that education wasn't about pride. It was about humanity. But little did anyone know, this was only the beginning of Mr. Lewis's story. Because something far bigger was waiting for him, something that would take his quiet genius far beyond the walls of Lincoln High. Days passed, but the story of the janitor genius refused to fade. It spread beyond Lincoln High, slipping quietly into town conversations. Parents heard it from their children, and soon even local newspapers mentioned the mysterious school janitor who solved an impossible math problem. Yet Mr. Lewis continued his work as if nothing had changed, mopping the same floors, emptying the same bins, and greeting everyone with that same gentle smile. But behind those calm eyes was a past few could imagine. Late one evening, when the school was silent and moonlight touched the dusty hallway floors, Emily found Mr. Lewis sitting alone in the teacher's lounge, staring at an old photograph. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer. The picture showed a much younger Mr. Lewis, standing proudly beside three men in suits. One of them held a framed certificate. Emily looked at it and whispered, "Is that you?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, a long time ago." She sat down across from him, the quiet hum of the vending machine filling the air. "What happened?" she asked softly. "Why did you stop?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze drifted to the window. "I was 25, he said finally, studying advanced mathematics at a top university. I loved numbers more than anything. They made sense when the world didn't." His voice trembled slightly as he continued. "But then my father died. My younger brother and sister were still in school. Someone had to take care of them." Emily's heart sank. "So, you left?" "Yes," he said. "I left everything. My research, my professors, my dream. I took any job I could find. I cleaned offices, repaired furniture, and later found work at this school. It wasn't easy, but I never regretted it. My family made it through, and that's worth more than any title or degree." He smiled faintly, but there was sadness behind it. People think success is standing at the front of a classroom, but sometimes success is just making sure your family eats. Sometimes it's surviving. Emily listened quietly, realizing she was hearing something no one else knew. "But you never stopped studying, did you?" she asked. He chuckled softly. "No, numbers are my peace. After everyone goes home, I like to stay a little longer. The world feels quiet then. I write formulas on old notebooks, solve puzzles just for fun. Some nights it feels like I'm back in my university lab again." Emily smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "You're still a teacher, Mr. Lewis, just a different kind." He looked at her kindly. "We're all teachers, Emily. Some just teach with chalk, others with silence." The next morning, Emily told a few friends what she had learned. Not to gossip, but because she wanted people to understand. And for the first time, students began to treat Mr. Lewis with deep respect. They greeted him like a mentor, not a janitor. Some even started asking him for help with math. And to everyone's surprise, he explained the toughest concepts in ways that were easy and clear. One day, the principal, Mr. Hayward, noticed a group of students gathered around the janitor during lunch, listening closely as he explained a complex geometry question using just chalk and an old board. Curious, the principal walked over and watched. For a moment, he forgot he was looking at a janitor. It felt like watching a master professor teaching his class. That same week, an education blogger from the local paper visited the school. After hearing rumors of the janitor who teaches math, she interviewed students, teachers, and finally, Mr. Lewis himself. His story moved her deeply, and 2 days later, an article appeared online titled "The Hidden Genius of Lincoln High." It spread like wildfire. By the weekend, Mr. Lewis's story was being shared on social media. Universities began reaching out, offering to sponsor his degree or invite him to guest lectures. But Mr. Lewis politely declined every offer. "I'm not chasing recognition," he said. "I'm just happy to be useful." Yet deep down, he knew something was changing. The quiet world he had built around himself was starting to wake up. The truth he had hidden for years was no longer his secret alone. And while he remained humble, the world had finally begun to see him not as the man who cleaned the floors, but as the man who taught everyone what real brilliance looked like. What no one knew yet was that this attention would soon lead to something much bigger, something that would test Mr. Lewis's humility, his patience, and even his faith in people. Because when genius is revealed, the world doesn't just applaud, it also tests. And his biggest test was just around the corner. The week after the math competition, something shifted at Lincoln High. The halls once filled with the careless chatter of students now held a new kind of whisper, one of respect for Mr. Lewis, the janitor. Students who used to walk past him without a second glance now offered greetings. Teachers smiled warmly, and even the principal treated him like an honored guest. Yet through it all, Mr. Lewis remained unchanged. He still wore his old blue uniform, carried his mop with quiet dignity, and cleaned every corner of the school as if it were a sacred duty. But not everyone found peace in this new reality. For Mr. Clark, the arrogant math teacher who had started the whole thing, guilt was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every time he saw Mr. Lewis working diligently, a pang of shame struck his heart. The memory of his own cruel smirk and the sound of mocking laughter replayed in his mind. One afternoon, unable to bear the weight any longer, Mr. Clark sought out Mr. Lewis. He found him in an empty classroom, bathed in sunlight, carefully fixing a broken chair. Mr. Clark hesitated at the door, the words caught in his throat. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mr. Lewis," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Can we talk?" Mr. Lewis looked up, his expression as calm and gentle as ever. "Of course, sir. What's on your mind?" Mr. Clark stepped inside, his voice trembling slightly. "I owe you an apology," he managed. "I treated you like a joke. I laughed at you. I thought I was smarter, but I was just wrong." Mr. Lewis set the chair down and wiped his hands on a cloth. "You don't have to apologize, Mr. Clark. We all make mistakes." "No," the teacher insisted, his eyes glistening. "This wasn't just a mistake. It was pride. I looked down on you because of your job. I thought a man's worth came from his title, not from who he is. But you taught me more than I've learned in years." A soft smile touched Mr. Lewis's lips. "Sometimes life teaches us the hard way. Pride is a tricky thing. It makes us forget that every person has a story." A quiet moment passed between them, the afternoon light painting golden stripes across the chalkboard. "Can I ask you something?" Mr. Clark said finally. "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were? You could have been a professor, a researcher." Mr. Lewis chuckled softly. "Because I don't need titles to feel complete. I used to chase them, but life has a way of humbling you. It reminds you that knowledge means nothing without kindness." Mr. Clark nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "You're right," he whispered. "I spent my whole life trying to be the smartest man in the room, and I forgot to be the kindest." Mr. Lewis placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Then today is a good day to start." From that day on, a remarkable friendship blossomed. Many evenings, Mr. Clark would find his way to the janitor's closet, notebook in hand. They would sit together, discussing everything from complex math problems to the simple philosophies of life. One evening, Mr. Clark sighed. "You know, if you ever taught a class, students would listen differently. You make things sound so simple, so alive." Mr. Lewis smiled. "That's because math isn't just about numbers. It's about patterns. It teaches patience, just like life. You can't rush either." The story didn't end there. The next day, the principal summoned them both. He'd received an email from a university dean who had read about Mr. Lewis online. They wanted to invite him to speak at a prestigious mathematical symposium. Mr. Lewis was hesitant. "I'm just a janitor, sir. I don't belong on that stage." But Mr. Clark stepped forward firmly. "You belong there more than anyone I know," he declared. After a long pause, Mr. Lewis finally nodded. "All right then," he said quietly. "But only if I can still come back here to clean afterward." When the day of the symposium arrived, the auditorium was packed. As the humble janitor walked onto the stage in his cleanest uniform, a hush fell over the crowd. His voice, trembling at first, grew steady and strong. "I'm not here to show off what I know," he began. "I'm here to remind you that brilliance doesn't come from a title. It comes from curiosity, kindness, and perseverance. Life took me away from my dreams, but it never took my love for learning." The entire room rose to its feet in a thunderous applause. In the front row, Mr. Clark clapped the loudest, tears of pride streaming down his face. He realized that the man he once mocked had just taught a hall full of scholars the greatest lesson of all: that true genius has nothing to prove. It simply exists, shining quietly where no one expects to find it. The day after the symposium, Lincoln High was glowing. Students walked a little taller, teachers smiled a little brighter, and the janitor everyone once ignored, Mr. Lewis, was now the school's quiet hero. He returned to work just as he'd promised, in his same blue uniform, with his same old mop. As he moved through the halls, students offered soft applause, teachers shook his hand. Someone even taped a newspaper clipping of his speech right on the main bulletin board. But fame, even the gentle kind, brings a new kind of attention. The story spread like wildfire. Reporters came calling, news vans parked outside, and interview requests poured in from universities and TV channels. Some wanted to celebrate him, but others just wanted to use his story for their own spotlight. Mr. Lewis, ever calm, smiled at every question, answered kindly, and politely declined when asked to appear on big shows. "I appreciate the offer," he would say softly, "but I have work to do." Still, things were changing. The simple quiet of his life was being replaced by noise, opinions, and expectations. They called him the janitor genius, the humble mathematician. But to him, he was still just Marcus Lewis, a man who loved math and peace. One evening, after the reporters had finally left, Mr. Clark found him alone in the hallway, wiping down a classroom door. "You've become a legend, my friend," Mr. Clark said, smiling. "The whole city is talking about you." Mr. Lewis chuckled softly. "Legends fade, Mr. Clark. Floors still need mopping." Mr. Clark laughed. "You really don't want the fame, do you?" Mr. Lewis just shook his head. "Fame can make people forget who they are. I've spent years learning to be invisible, and I've found peace in it." But the world kept noticing. A week later, a prestigious invitation arrived from the University of Chicago for a research roundtable, an event reserved for the world's top mathematicians. At first he refused, but Mr. Clark convinced him. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. "Just share what you love." So he went, dressed simply in a white shirt and an old blazer. When he walked into the grand hall filled with professors, a hush fell over the room. Some smiled with respect, others whispered with skepticism. The moderator introduced him as the self-taught genius, and the audience clapped. For a moment, Mr. Lewis felt out of place. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "I never stopped learning," he said. "Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because curiosity is what keeps us alive. Knowledge is not a mountain to climb, it's a garden to tend." The room grew still. For the next hour, he explained complex mathematical patterns using simple, everyday examples, blending pure logic with profound philosophy. His voice was steady, his words humble, yet every sentence carried the weight of truth. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then the entire audience rose to their feet and clapped, not out of pity but out of genuine, deep respect. A famous mathematician approached him afterward. "Mr. Lewis," he said, "you reminded us why we started loving math in the first place." But as the applause echoed, Mr. Lewis noticed his hands were trembling. The noise, the lights, the attention. It wasn't his world. He missed the quiet halls, the rhythmic sound of his mop, the simple piece of work done honestly. That night he sat on the steps outside the university, just staring up at the stars. Mr. Clark joined him. "You were brilliant today," he said. "You inspired everyone." Mr. Lewis smiled faintly. "You know what's funny? I spent years cleaning floors no one noticed. Now everyone sees me, but I miss the silence of being unseen." Mr. Clark looked at him, his eyes filled with admiration. "That's what makes you special, Lewis. You don't chase the light. You carry it quietly." The following Monday, Mr. Lewis was back at Lincoln High as if nothing had happened. He picked up his broom, fixed a squeaky locker door, and greeted every student with a warm nod. Some kids asked for selfies, others thanked him for inspiring them. He just laughed kindly and said, "Do your homework first. Fame can wait." Then, one evening, an unexpected letter arrived, sealed with a gold emblem. It was from the National Mathematics Council, inviting him to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution to the spirit of learning. Mr. Lewis read it twice, smiled to himself, and tucked it into his pocket. He didn't tell a soul. The next morning, the principal found out and made an announcement over the speakers. "We are proud to share that our very own Mr. Lewis has been honored nationally for his brilliance and humility." The halls erupted with applause. Mr. Lewis, standing by the window with his mop, just closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't crave awards or headlines, but he felt a quiet gratitude, not for the recognition, but for the reminder that kindness and curiosity still mattered. As the students cheered, Mr. Clark looked at him and said softly, "You've changed us all, Lewis." Mr. Lewis smiled back. "I didn't change anyone. I just reminded them that greatness wears simple clothes." And in that moment, Mr. Clark understood. True genius isn't about solving problems. It's about touching hearts, quietly, humbly, without ever needing to be seen. Months passed, but the story of Marcus Lewis never faded. His name had become a quiet legend in the town. Teachers, students, and even strangers spoke of the janitor who once solved an impossible math problem and changed how people saw the world. Yet, through all the praise and attention, he remained exactly the same: calm, humble, and unseen by choice. Every morning he arrived early, unlocking the school doors, wiping the floors, and preparing the classrooms. He moved with patience, his steps steady, his thoughts peaceful. When students arrived, he greeted them with his familiar smile. "Morning, kids," he would say softly. "Make today count." One cold winter morning, Mr. Clark, the math teacher, walked into the hallway carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Mr. Lewis. "For the best teacher I know," he said jokingly. Mr. Lewis laughed. "Careful, they might take your job if they hear you say that." They both smiled, the warmth between them real and unspoken. Since that day in the classroom, Mr. Clark had changed completely. He no longer taught with arrogance, but with patience. He often told his students, "Don't judge a person by their clothes, judge them by their heart." And when students asked why, he would glance at the janitor sweeping the hall and simply say, "Because I once did, and it was the greatest mistake of my life." Years went by. Students graduated, teachers retired, but the story of Mr. Lewis stayed alive like a quiet heartbeat in Lincoln High. The janitor genius, as the newspapers once called him, never left the school. He refused promotions and offers from universities, saying only, "This place keeps me grounded." Sometimes during lunch you could still find him in an empty classroom, writing equations on the board for no one in particular. It wasn't about showing off. It was his way of praying, his way of staying connected to the beauty of learning. One afternoon, a young student named Sarah entered the room. "Mr. Lewis," she said shyly, "are you really the man who solved that impossible problem years ago?" He turned, smiling kindly. "That's what they say." "Is it true you could have been a professor?" she asked, her eyes wide. He chuckled softly. "Maybe," he said, "but being here feels right. I don't need a stage. I have this floor, these kids, this life. That's enough." She nodded thoughtfully, and before leaving she said, "When I grow up, I want to be like you." Mr. Lewis watched her go, his heart full. He whispered to himself, "No, kid, be better." Weeks later, the principal announced that Mr. Lewis was retiring after decades of service. The entire school gathered in the auditorium. Mr. Clark stood at the podium, his voice trembling slightly. "We are not just saying goodbye to a janitor today," he said. "We are honoring a man who taught us what true greatness looks like." When Mr. Lewis walked onto the stage, the crowd rose in applause. The sound was thunderous. He stood there quietly, humbled, his eyes glistening. "I don't deserve all this," he said softly into the microphone. "I only did what anyone should. Help, listen, and learn every day." He paused, then added, "If you ever doubt yourself, remember, your worth isn't in your job or your title. It's in what you give to others." That evening, as the sun set behind the school, Mr. Lewis walked one last time down the hallway he had cleaned for years. The golden light reflected on the floors he had polished. He paused by the classroom door where it had all begun, smiled, and whispered, "Thank you," before quietly walking away. Decades later, students still spoke of him. His name became part of Lincoln High's legacy. A framed picture of him hung in the main hallway beneath a quote that read, "True genius is not in solving problems, but in inspiring others to believe they can." And so, the story of Marcus Lewis, the janitor who taught the world about humility, respect, and quiet brilliance, lived on, reminding everyone that greatness can shine even from the humblest hands, and that sometimes the man holding the mop is the wisest one in the room.